Well, I was working on this bracelet and I thought, oh my goodness, why don't I show my wonderful subscribers how to make this wonderful link? You can add this to just about anything. It's a spin on the very first video that I did, very first long form video when I really didn't know what I was doing. I may still not know what I'm doing. It's just an extension of what we did in that first video. I'm going to link it so you can see how much I have improved and how that you can take a simple design and just keep building on it. We're going to use 20 gauge for our structure of our bracelet. We're going to use 16 gauge for a wonderful little clasp that we'll do at the end. Have your round nose, flush cutters, chain nose, and bail pliers on hand, and including a ruler so we can measure out all of our 3 inches of 20 gauge wire. Okay, like you saw before, I had pre-cut about 14. The little link measures just about a ½ inch. For a 7-inch bracelet, you'll need about 14 links, maybe a little less depending on how big you make your clasp. For the beads, I'm using a mixture of these 3mm seed beads. I find that the seed beads work really well for this project, and I found in my stash these 1mm sterling silver beads that will fit on the 20 gauge. That's going to be probably the trickiest part of this tutorial, is finding a bead that fits the 20 gauge wire. That's small, that's going to fit into this little area, so that's going to be the tricky spot, but I'm sure you've got something around. And seed beads is always a good go-to because they a lot of times they do have a large hole and they're still small at the same time. I start with bail pliers using the 5th step, which is 7mm. Placing the wire in the middle there. Let me move this out of the way. And bending on around. And we're going to crisscross these wires. Doesn't have to be absolutely perfect, but we definitely want to find a crisscross. We want to find a midpoint. Now, I haven't seen many other people do this in other videos, but because I like my bail pliers and I like how they are steadier than my own hand, to come in here with some chain nose pliers right at the top and bend straight up with the one side. And I don't see anyone do this, but this is what I do. I turn it around so I can really have a good steady grip on the wire. Back to the chain nose pliers right at that joint and bend the other wire straight up. We got a little something going on here. Clean them all up as best as you can, get them straight. Back to our bail pliers, using the first step, which is 2mm, right on that little area where all of our bends are. We're going to press near the bail, press those 2 wires on around, aiming for the center of our loop on the other side until it just touches. Oh, I got it on there, good. Holding your link like this, with our beads facing upwards, we're going to take these 2 end pieces and slide it through this opening until we have it like this. Now you're going, Carrie, this doesn't help me in it because I haven't made anything yet. This is the very first one I'm making. I know, I kind of had things reversed a little bit because I was like, oh my goodness, I need to show them. And I'd already had this going, so please forgive me. Making the first link is the same from this part on. We've already made our loop. We've bent around our 2 wires, and you will have the same thing in your very first link. I like to take some very thin chain nose pliers, grab the ends, and I just take my hands and just gently bend them out to get that angle that all these other links have. This is where you are attaching your beads that you chose. I've kind of got a pattern going on here. Oh, this one has no beads on it. I would choose that one. So I have a little pattern going here. We're going to put some little loops on the end to attach, to anchor these ends. We're going to trim the ends. Put your link right on your ruler, and we're going to trim to 3/16. And I'll just use my other cut as a guide, using the flat side of my pliers, and trim off that other end. Round nose pliers. Turning in that wire to make our little loop. Then I'll take some chain nose pliers and just really make sure that that end is in there as close as we can get it. This one's pretty good. Just a little bit more. And then I'll look up above and make sure the loop is in line with the wire. We don't want it hanging out this way or hanging out over this way. Nice and in line with the wire. And completely closed. I think that's good. All right, let's make another one. Again with our 20 gauge, 3 inches, using the bail pliers, 5th step, 7 millimeters, to make this first large loop. We're finding the basic middle of our wire. Crossing over. We got to bring those wires straight up and down. Chain nose pliers right in there at the cross point and bend straight up. You don't have to do this, it's just what I do so I can keep using the bail plier to really hold this steady. I'm going to bend that down just a little bit more because it's coming out. Slide in there with some chain nose pliers and bend that up. Bail pliers using the first step, which is 2 millimeters, and pressing right over near the bail down the other side in the center. Now you're saying, Carrie, these are wonky, they're overlapped. That is okay. Don't you worry about that, because remember, we still have to bend them out and make the loops on the end and stuff. So don't be too concerned if you've got a little overlappage. That's not a word. Well, we're going to use it. At this point, again, this is where we're going to connect, holding your links so that the beads are facing up. We're going to take the 2 ends of the link we just made and slide them into that open spot. I turn it around, take some chain nose pliers, and hold that bend. And then slightly, just with your hands, don't need nothing fancy, bend them out to make that angle. Now here is the spot, this point in time where you're going to add your beads. And I'm going to reverse back, so I'm going to put just 2 purple beads, these wonderful little iridescent seed beads, 1 on each. Slide them down. And I'm going to trim these ends to 3/16. Let's just do 1 and then use that cut as my guide. Round nose pliers right on the end And you'll see me, I'm always going on from the back side. I just find that holding it upside down or towards the back side and rolling in, it's just easier on my hands. And you might find that a different position works better for you. I just noticed that just people hold their tools, they hold the wire in different ways. But I find that rolling in this way is easier on my hand than trying to turn in that way. I've got my hand upside down, facing upwards, and then rolling that in to attach. And just like before, I'll come back in with some chain nose pliers and make sure these loops are lined up and closed. This is a great link. It's very slinky as well. I can see that this is going to be very nice for a bracelet. Let's do one or two more. I hope everyone had a wonderful Thanksgiving. It was wonderful over here. Every Thanksgiving I host, everyone comes over here, and I think it evolved from when the kids were little and we didn't want to be traipsing around with little kids. All the grandparents and all the extended family just came over here, and it just has stayed that way. So it was a really wonderful, wonderful day. I know Thanksgiving is not great for everybody. Sometimes this season is very difficult for many people. My heart goes out to you if you're having a hard time. Gonna make that little bend on our link with our first step, 2 millimeters. Bend on around, aiming for the center of that loop as best as you can. Connection time. Let's get what we've made so far. Holding it with the beads upwards, find this little opening, and we're going to slide these 2 ends in so that it comes out like this. Chain nose pliers right on the end there, just holding firmly and pulling out just a little bit with your hands. Nothing fancy there. And I'm going to put on my beads. Now I'm just going to eyeball this 3/16. I think that looks good. And I think that looks good. That's the way I cook. I just eyeball everything. I'll get a recipe for a general guide, and I just eyeball everything. Everything turns out great. Just making these loops on the end. Oh, lost a bead in the melee. That might happen. This part can be a little fiddly with the beads on there. Not to worry. I'm going to switch over to my chain nose pliers. Close in that loop. This is what I'm talking about. This one is definitely, it's off to the side a little bit. We don't want that. We want to have it nice and lined up for the best closure. There we go. Coming along nicely. Has such a nice slink to it. And a little movement of the beads, sliding back and forth. Really nice. Very, very, very nice. Now we are going to make the sweetest little clasp that's going to work with this design. It's not going to need any jump rings. We're going to loop around one of these necks. It's going to come on around and hook into one of the links. No jump rings. Hallelujah. All right, let's make this clasp. Before we make that first loop, I want to measure off 1 centimeter. That's where I'm going to do a 90-degree bend. And now I can use the bail pliers, that first bail, which is 2 millimeters, to make that loop. 1 centimeter and 2 millimeters go really well together when making little loops. Get that nice and straight. I'm going to take some chain nose pliers to help me make this backwards bend, kind of like a 45 degree, not 90. That's going to work really well. Back to bail pliers using the third step, which is 4 millimeters. I'm going to do this little hook, this little back bend of a hook. Press straight on around the bail until it's sitting kind of parallel like this. Now this is totally preference as well. I kind of go somewhere in where the little loop is, little connecting loop, and that's where I'll put the bend in. Now obviously this is too long because we don't want that poke in your wrist. I'm just going to trim that down and then file it just a little bit to smooth the edges. This is where I'm getting out that 16 gauge that I mentioned in the beginning of the video. I like to wipe down any tarnish that is on the wire prior to cutting. Flush cut. And I'm going to cut 1.5 inches. Now when I first did it, I did 2 inches. We're going to see if 1.5 inches works because I like to eyeball things. I like to just see if it works. It'll work. I know it will. I'm going to make this little connecting loop right here. Before we make that first loop, I want to measure off 1 centimeter. That's where I'm going to do a 90-degree bend. And now I can use the bail pliers, that first bail, which is 2 millimeters, to make that loop. 1 centimeter and 2 millimeters go really well together when making little loops. Get that nice and straight. I'm going to take some chain nose pliers to help me make this backwards bend, kind of like a 45 degree, not 90. That's going to work really well. Back to bail pliers using the third step, which is 4 millimeters. I'm going to do this little hook, this little back bend of a hook. Press straight on around the bail until it's sitting kind of parallel like this. Now this is totally preference as well. I kind of go somewhere in where the little loop is, little connecting loop, and that's where I'll put the bend in. Now obviously this is too long because we don't want that poke in your wrist. I'm just going to trim that down and then file it just a little bit to smooth the edges. And there you have the sweetest little clasp that is going to work so perfectly with this bracelet with no jump rings. I'm looking at my timer on my phone and it's just under 2 minutes, and that's with me talking and taking my time. So probably in a minute, you can make this sweetest little clasp. Oh my gosh, someone is knocking on the door. Has anyone noticed that whenever you're in the bathroom or you're trying to take a nap, someone knocks on the door? Or the phone rings. Oh my goodness. So anyway, we have come to the end of this wonderful tutorial together today. I always look forward to Tuesdays. You know, it's Tutorial Tuesday, and I was working on this bracelet and I'm like, what am I thinking? I've got to show my girls how to make this wonderful little bracelet that you can leave it plain. If you don't put any beads on this, you're really going to work through this really fast. But why not take the opportunity to place some beads on this expansion of this wonderful, simple link that gives you an opportunity to put some beads on there. Very slinky. And then the movement of the beads on there. Very nice. Well, as always, I had a great time, and I look forward to seeing you again next week. Please let me know where you're watching from. Leave a comment if you have questions. I'm always willing to do my best to help you if you have any struggles. And as always, I'll see you next week for Tutorial Tuesday.